Michael Backus is with us once again. He joined us in November, in case you missed it, for that Q&A. It's on our YouTube, it's in our client portal, it's in your healthcare practitioner portal on our website, so you can go back and watch it. Lots of great information there. But once again, we are joined today by Michael Backus, who is co-founder and chief product officer at Perfect. And if you are not familiar with the brand Perfect, they are a company who create premium infused flower blends simply to help people get the most out of their cannabis experience, to help you feel the way that you want to feel, as they say. So Michael, hi, how are you? How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good. Well, today is a really important conversation. I'm really glad that we're having it. It is Mental Health Awareness Month in May. And we had a lot of questions that came in that focus on this topic of mental health. And, you know, who better to go to answer these questions than you? And so I'm so thankful that you're here to help us out today. And for those who are joining online live, I encourage you to write in questions to the Q&A box. Of course, we do have some from our community that were asked in advance that we will get to as well. And I have sort of grouped them into like topics. And yeah, if you want to just jump into it, Michael, I can go ahead and start asking.
Sure, absolutely.
Questions. Okay, great. So I think that one of the biggest questions that came in when we reached out to our community and said, we'll be talking mental health, what questions do you have? The biggest question was, what are the known benefits for cannabis for mental health? Just very overarching.
Well, I mean, I think most of the evidence is what they call preclinical. It's been done the testing has primarily been done in animals, and there has been some testing done in humans. And I think that the best way to describe the state of the evidence right now is preliminary. I think that, and the reason that's important is that a lot of people have a tendency to hope that cannabis is going to be a panacea, that it's just going to be, you know, a Swiss Army knife for every medical condition, and it's not. And there's some things you have to be careful about. The most important thing you have to be careful about is the constituency of your cannabis. In the last 100 years, we've seen the cannabinoid content of cannabis shift from being about 50-50 THC CBD to almost 100% THC. And if you go looking for it, you can find 100% CBD. And you can find some ratioed products in between. But if you grow cannabis in a field for a few generations, typically what happens is that you start to see these 50-50 plants emerge. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is that it's probably the best approach to when using cannabis for any mental condition, to go for something that has a little bit of a CBD buffer available to you. And the reason is that when you take THC by itself, you can get anxious. You can potentially exacerbate depression. And it's kind of unknown what it could do for more serious mental illnesses, such as bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. So I just really think the most important advice I can give you is use THC and CBD together if you're going to treat any mental condition with cannabis.
I really like how you say use a CBD buffer. That's a really great way to explain that, how the combination could be helpful. And I know some others had questions. I believe this one was from a healthcare practitioner who's just curious to know if someone suffers with depression, what is it about cannabis that might differ from the just prescribed medications that are out there? This could also extend probably to other medications as well, maybe not specifically for depression, but what could cannabis offer that's different than maybe a medication might offer?
Well, I mean, the pharmacology of cannabis in these conditions is still kind of being understood. I've known a lot of patients who successfully use cannabis with SSRIs, common antidepressants, with not a lot of side effects. And in fact, they find that they can help with some of the side effects of SSRIs, like decreased libido. And so it's something you really want to talk to your physician about. It's something you really want to control your dose. What I usually recommend is people use low dose edibles, meaning less than 5 milligrams of THC in the edible, and then move the dose around to see what dose is most effective for your particular metabolism and your particular state of your own endocannabinoid system. Because if you use a lot of cannabis, what happens is that you have a tendency to reduce the density in your nervous system of cannabinoid receptors. So it takes more to get the same effect. It's tolerance for the effects. And so if you don't have a tolerance, you can get away with a really small dose. For a lot of people, that dose could be between 1 and 2.5 milligrams of THC, really a small dose. If you use cannabis regularly and have for a while, that dose could be 10 milligrams, even higher. I don't really recommend developing a tolerance to the effects of cannabis. And the reason is that the way cannabinoids work is by mimicking your body's own cannabinoids, endocannabinoids. And your body doesn't store endocannabinoids. It makes them when it needs them. So when you take a systemic plant cannabinoid like THC regularly and in higher doses, what will happen is your body will react by reducing the number of receptors available for that cannabis to interact with. And so what you really want to do is you want to always use the minimum effective dose. And so back to the question about depression, I think the idea is that cannabis, when it's intelligently applied, is used to just move the needle of one's mood just enough and no more. That's going to reduce the side effect profile, and it's probably going to increase the effectiveness of cannabis for treating symptoms.
That's thank you for clarifying the low dose, under 5 milligrams, that it's okay to start with just 1 to 2.5 milligrams. I think that's a question that comes up a lot, and that's a lot of concern for individuals because they get scared that cannabis equates to intoxication, which is not always the case if we're limiting how much we're taking, and we're taking it really slow and finding that lowest possible dose to find relief and not trying to build up that tolerance. And I also love whenever I speak with you, because your answers organically go in the direction that the community questions, what people want to know. So just mentioning SSRIs, we did have a question from an individual who said they are taking SSRIs and are afraid to go off of them, but would like to introduce cannabis. And then a companion question to that came in live was about guidance of weaning off of anxiety medication with cannabis. So for someone who doesn't necessarily want to go off of medication, they want to introduce cannabis, is there a way to safely incorporate that into their regimen? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, always talk to your doctor before you modify a dose of any medication you're taking to treat any kind of mental conditions. Really important. Some medications have teeth when you try to go off them. They want to keep you on them, and so you have to be really careful, especially with any anxiety meds, like Xanax, stuff like that. the thing about cannabis is, and it's a really important thing to understand, is that cannabis, THC, for example, has um, biphasic effects, which means it has two different effects, different ranges of effects at different dose levels. So cannabis tends to reduce anxiety at low doses. High THC cannabis can certainly cause anxiety at high doses. And so what you want to find is that sweet spot of dose. And it usually is on the low end of things. And, what you might want to explore, again, with your doctor, is this idea that, maybe you want a little bit of cannabis and slightly less of the other medication. But you have to talk to a doctor who knows you and can help you guide what's going to be best for you. It's not one size fits all, okay? It's very, very personal how you respond to the active ingredients of cannabis. And therefore, it's really important that you have some professional guidance to help you tune it up. And there's not as big a stigma as there used to be but there certainly is still a stigma in some industries and some occupations about using cannabis. But because the laws are being reformed, it's certainly not as bad even as it was 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So talk to your doctor. And also your doctor has to keep your secrets.
Yes.
Take advantage of that.
Yes, very important. Your doctor has to keep your secrets. Thank you for saying that. One question came in that took it back to the last response in respect to tolerance. I'm just wondering about the ECS. Does the ECS reset itself after consumption is halted for a few days? So in regards to tolerance.
Yeah. So with regard to tolerance, there's a little bit of contradictory evidence, but there's also some really good evidence in humans, not just in animals. And the evidence in humans based on brain scanning and is interesting. You appear to have some degree of reset of tolerance beginning in 3 days of abstinence. After 28 days, you have almost a complete reset, except for in the expression of endocannabinoid receptors in one part of the brain called the hippocampus that's linked to memory and learning. And to get a full reset in the hippocampus can take 6 months. So that's quite a break. Now, but one interesting thing about the 6-month story was that they did brain scanning in this Australian study. They took hair samples of the people. They didn't believe their self-described consumption patterns. They just looked for cannabis metabolites in the hair. And you can't really fool somebody about that. Unless you're me, then you can. So the thing that's interesting about that is that people who had THC alone in their hair samples, it took about 6 months to get full expression of these endocannabinoid receptors to return in the hippocampus, linked to memory and learning. People who had THC and CBD in their hair samples, their hippocampuses were indistinguishable from people who'd never used cannabis at all. So this idea of a potential neuroprotective effect of CBD when you use THC supports my contention that you're trying to get a reset or protect yourself from some of the impacts of using THC over time. It might be a good idea to use CBD in concert with THC.
Yes, that's really interesting about that 6 months with the hair. I'll have to snag that study from you after our call. But speaking of studies, and you did touch on this in the beginning with a bit of harm reduction, if, just paying attention to maybe what you're predispositioned to, what kind of mental health you're looking to address. Someone did ask speaking to a new study that suggested adolescents with cannabis use disorder had increased odds of adverse psychosocial events. Is there a way to dose, if looking to go in this direction of cannabis, could be any cannabinoid, in a way that one won't become dependent, or a use disorder will not develop? Is there some research?
I think a lot of this has to do with dose. The thing is that when you're young, people like to test boundaries. I certainly do.
Yeah.
And so often it's the dose that you can withstand rather than the dose you would enjoy.
Mhm.
And so because cannabis is relatively non-toxic, people will really push the boundaries of dose. All right, until they have a really adverse effect. And then that often scares people off from using cannabis at all.
Oh, sure.
I mean, you can get hypervigilant, paranoid, really have a really, really bad time. It's the classic edible nightmare or cookie casualty, where you take a large dose edible and you really don't have a good time.
Mhm.
The kind of wise ass response that I have is cannabis can't kill you, but if you take enough, it can convince you that it's going to kill you.
Mm.
And so you just really have to watch high dose edibles, because you can have a really bad time. And those can have serious long-term effects, as far as they can make you predisposed to anxiety. And so I really think the important issue here is get a hold of your dose, and you're less likely to develop long-term problems with using cannabis.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that also answers, there was another question about, can cannabis lead to depression? Someone wrote in and they said, I find that it helps with my depression more so than medications I used to take, but I'm worried in the long run it will have the opposite effect for me. And I think you sort of answered that with paying attention to your dose and how you feel, but do you want to add
Don't let
to
your
that?
dose. Don't let your
Mhm.
dose escalate. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, like you really, and one of the best ways to do that is to make sure you're using CBD at the same time, because CBD does a really interesting thing with THC. Is it has a tendency to kind of govern the effect a little bit. So it doesn't mask the effect, but it helps manage or
Mhm.
mediate the effects. And a lot of people really don't have experience of using these compounds together. But I highly recommend you check it out, because these entourages of THC and CBD together seem to be more effective for a lot of
Mhm.
people than THC alone.
Absolutely. I like how you say manage the effects rather than mask, because two totally different concepts here. Um, yes, that's great. And so when it comes to, I'm going to kind of feed into some of the recommendation questions that came in. Someone was looking for a specific strain or cannabinoid profile or terpene profile to look for when looking to use medicinally for anxiety or depression or another mental health disorder.
Okay, so if I was designing an entourage for anxiety, I would find cannabis that had THC, uh, healthy titer of CBD, and I would look for something that smelled a little bit like lavender. Look for something that had linalool, which is the essential oil that's also found in lavender. Linalool is really relaxing, seems to lower blood pressure moments after inhalation, and is probably the closest thing in cannabis to a chill pill.
Mm.
So really good for people who are anxious. And at low dose, you can use it during the day without getting sleepy, so, which is pretty handy. What I would stay away from is super high caryophyllene strains,
Mm.
like cookies and the dessert strains, like wedding cake, because caryophyllene can make a lot of people jumpy, and that can actually make you anxious rather than relieving your anxiety.
Very interesting. And so, speaking to feeling sleepy, what if someone is noticing that their poor sleep is actually impacting their mental health? Is there something that they could utilize for sleep that would benefit their mental health in the long run?
Well, cannabis is kind of a mixed bag with sleep. And the reason is cannabis seems to interfere with how much REM sleep you get. So how much time every night you're dreaming. And that REM sleep seems to be linked to kind of psychological garbage collection. It's basically your brain kind of organizing itself and sweeping the cupboards and wiping down the shelves. And a lot of people who use cannabis for sleep find over time that they're noticing that the quality of the rest they're getting and the benefits of getting sleep seem to be affected. And so I have a tendency to tell people who are using cannabis for their mental health to dose in the morning and don't dose so much after 5 in the afternoon and see how that affects your sleep. Now, if you're one of these people who just cannot get to sleep and you're using cannabis to get to sleep every night, I understand that it works for you and I appreciate it. However, I'm just telling you that it may have a negative impact long-term on aspects of your sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing you might try to do is use some THC in the evening. Use it as early as you can to let the kind of sedative metabolites build up as your body metabolizes off the THC, and then go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Reducing the amount of metabolites you have in your body when you reach that REM stage of your sleep. The other thing too is if you're dealing with anxiety, one of the things that I've always recommended is take CBD in the morning, take CBD at lunch, don't take CBD after 5 in the afternoon. And the reason is that CBD actually has been shown clinically to be somewhat wake promoting.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that it actually can keep you up. Like for me, if I take CBD, I will stay up all night, not go to sleep. And so a lot of people use it to relax to go to sleep. And what they're actually using the CBD for is to reduce their anxiety so they can go to sleep. But if you start your day with a dose of CBD, then take it at 1, and maybe the last time around 4, your baseline anxiety level will typically go down. And it's easier for you to go to sleep, stay asleep, because you don't have the hamster wheel in your head.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, yeah, the hamster wheel. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with that. So one question did come in, and I know this study that they're referring to, but I'd like to get your feedback on this as well. So they asked about the study from Hopkins that showed the patients who consumed the brownies. And in the study, so for some background and context, the individuals were taking 640 milligrams of CBD, 20 milligrams of THC in combination with a polypharmacy. So there was caffeine, there was antidepressant, there was a sedative, there was, I think, blood pressure medication. So there was and they were looking in this study for the interactions of cannabinoids with the polypharmacy. Are you familiar with that one? It's a few weeks old. So this individual was asking, so the patients who consumed the brownies with CBD and THC felt more psychoactive effects of potentially THC. What are your thoughts on the study, and how should we think about it when advising patients?
Well, I mean, what's really interesting is, this is an attempt to do a naturalistic study with an unrealistic dose.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, a 640 milligram dose of CBD is a massive dose of CBD that normally you would only see if somebody was trying to achieve seizure control or doing a human clinical trial, because that's the only place these large doses are used. I've never met anybody who walks into a medical dispensary and buys CBD so that they can take a 500 milligram plus dose. I mean, it's just so expensive that most people won't do it.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm going to have to go for a second just to let somebody in to bring me furniture. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay. No problem. And if anyone is looking for that study too, we can put it in the descriptor of this of the video once it's on YouTube. But it was named Assessment of Orally Administered THC when Co-Administered with CBD. If you wanted to Google it as well, if you were curious to see what they found in the report.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
No, you're fine. There you go.
Got two nice stools for her
Oh, very nice.
lab. So yeah, and a couple of samples of a sample of CBN and a sample of CBG.
Very nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, the study was looking at unrealistic doses because the average consumer is probably taking somewhere between 50 and 100 milligrams daily of CBD. And this one was looking at 640. And then, so for the other portion to that, and I think it's relevant as well. So in the study, the participants were given this brownie 30 minutes after they were given the combination of the other drugs. And so a lot of the side effects realized by the participants were side effects that you would notice from these medications. And so, we know that CBD could potentially enhance the amount of medication in the body, maybe therefore enhancing the side effects of medications. So if someone is taking multiple drugs or pharmaceuticals or over-the-counter medications, is there advice you have for embarking on a cannabinoid therapy regimen at the same time as far as spacing? Or
I would still say dose control is
Yeah.
kind of everything. And the thing about it is, obviously, CBD does interact with enzymes associated with drug metabolism. And you have to kind of check on a drug by drug basis to see what the impact is. Is it going to raise the blood level of a medication? Is it going to make it harder for the medication to get into your bloodstream? Is it going to be metabolized more quickly? Is it going to hang around longer? Yeah, it's really, again, not one size fits all. And so the important thing is to look up and look at the names of your medications and compare them to one another with these databases that are online, that allow you to see, oh, are there side effects if I take A and B together, or A and B and C and D and E and F? I mean, yeah, as you get older, I mean, it's not unusual. I mean, I have friends who take 15 pills every day. It's not that unusual, blood pressure control, a statin, a this or that, or this or that. And so yeah, you just have to kind of dive in. The good news is that it can sound a little intimidating to do this research on drug interactions. It's not actually that hard. You get a feel for it. Once you check out one med, it's easier to check out the second med and the third med and the fourth med, and to start to see the patterns. All right. And so yeah, I just don't be afraid to jump in.
Awesome. Well, I'm trying to navigate which question to ask next, because I have one that's follow up to what you're saying right now. And then so I think I'll go with that and then go back to some of these live questions. But just kind of speaking to the jumping in and diving in, a healthcare professional did write in, and they mentioned that they don't want to overstep, but they believe a couple of their patients might benefit from cannabis for their well-being based on research that they've read. Is there a delicate way to approach this with them? I guess just around knowing the stigmas. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Did you ever use cannabis in college? It's the best. That's the best way to start. Right? You ever use cannabis in college? Oh no, I was totally scared of it. Oh no, or yeah, I used to like eat ice cream and smoke weed, and so it's gonna be somewhere in there. I didn't smoke cannabis because I was doing a mission for my church in the beginning. I used to go to Grateful Dead concerts and sell balloons of nitrous oxide in between smoking blunts. So there's going to be some way.
He's both ends of the spectrum, and maybe it will fall somewhere in there.
But you can raise it. You can raise it. Again, just like there's less of a stigma these days of using it, there's less of a stigma about asking about it. And it really you get some interesting conversations out of it. I mean, I know a lot of people who say, "Oh, no. Cannabis is not for me." And then you dig a little deeper and they say, "Yeah, I had a really, really dysphoric reaction. And I just can't, oh my gosh, it makes me hypervigilant and uncomfortable and
Mhm.
all of this stuff." And it's almost always because somebody took too much in a social setting
Mhm.
and got hypervigilant, really didn't have a good time, and no more. Or worse, became a full-blown cookie casualty and, wanted to go hide under a table for 6 hours.
Mhm.
Um,
For 6 hours.
yeah, for the
Yeah.
problem is that people are given terrible dose guidance and they're often convinced it's their problem if they have a problem, which is ridiculous.
Mhm.
You've just been given bad advice and you had a bad outcome. If you would have gotten better advice, there were more outcomes available to you.
Mhm.
That's my approach. So as far as broaching the subject, yeah, you know, what do you think of Grateful Dead's American Beauty? Well, there are lots of ways to kind of drive into this topic.
Right.
Yeah, so,
Very good. Well, I like this question because it can take it back to the blends that you have created at Perfect, because this individual is asking, how does a high linalool chemovar help with anxiety if in theory monoterpenes are lost in combustion?
they're definitely not lost.
Mm.
A portion of them are lost in combustion for sure. And that gets to another tip that I have about combustion in general. This idea that we follow at Perfect of sip, don't rip, which is the idea that when you smoke cannabis, don't try to make the combustion site turn white because it's so hot, because that'll break down um, terpenes, the essential oils of cannabis, into polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are really, really harsh and bad for you and carcinogenic. And one of the best ways to avoid that is by inhaling cannabis. You can inhale cannabis at the lowest temperature at which you can get the active ingredients into. So either by using a vaporizer at a lower temperature, say 390F, or if you're smoking, um, take very small puffs, keep the cherry red rather than yellow or white, and you'll actually get more of these terpenes into you. And we've really found that to be the case at Perfect, because we kind of emphasize the terpenes that we're using. We test them and we monitor the terpene content of time in the products. And what we're trying to do is make sure that those terpenes are available to our consumers. And one of the ways to kind of ensure that is teaching them how to combust this stuff so these compounds don't just get wiped out.
Mhm. Yes, very important. And yeah, and just great to speak to the blends that you all have created and the importance of understanding the terpene profiles and how they can, affect the way that we feel and get us towards a place of feeling the way we want to.
I
Right.
think it's more new. I mean, the thing about it is the evidence has not been spectacularly supportive for how well terpenes work as drugs, mainly because human beings have evolved systems to make certain that terpenes don't get to our brain, okay, because of the war between plants and animals 300 million years ago, where plants evolved these compounds to control animal nervous systems. And so animals fought back. They figured out a way to break these down before they got in the bloodstream and got to the brain. So I think to some degree, the terpenes are overstated as far as their potential pharmacology. But I still do think that they really do provide nuanced effects in combination with THC, CBD, or both. And it's one of the reasons we like to make these blends, because we do notice the difference between the blends. as far as the effect. Our stimulating blends have a tendency to be stimulating for most people. Our focusing blends have a tendency to be focusing. Our sedating blends seem to be sedating. And we haven't done large scale clinical trials yet, with placebo and controls, and we will. And right now, we'll just take a light approach. We'll say, look, we think that we're pushing the needle this way, pushing the needle that way. We're not going to guarantee you the same amount of, unconsciousness you'd get by inhaling halothane or surgical anesthetic, but this will relax you more than THC alone.
Absolutely. So going back a bit to the interactions, are there specific resources that you would recommend to check drug cannabis interactions?
Well, I'm going to pop online here, check and see what that cannabis on there. Yeah, go to Drug Bank. That's a good place to start. I've used it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's go.drugbank.com. And it has an interaction checker.
Oh, perfect.
So that's where I'd start.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. And so someone was asking, are your entourage formulations dovetailing into any of the preclinical work going into the University of California and other medical hospitals or cannabis clinician studies? So are you getting any of the blends or the formulations into any clinical trials?
No, we haven't tried yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy time to be in the cannabis business. And so what we're doing is we have such lofty goals as putting food on our tables right now.
Yeah, right.
And so we're not investing in a lot of research right now. What we do invest in is an enormous amount of analytical testing to make sure that what we want to be in our products is in our products. That's been our primary focus. I would imagine we'll probably be doing some trials, maybe in Brazil next year. So I've done them there before.
Amazing. That's great. Yes, and it is a very difficult time in the space. You guys are doing great. So I like this question that came in previously because it kind of ties us back to the beginning. Now you said it's not a panacea. So someone said, I've never had depression, but like lately life stressors have caused me to feel really down and like I could be on this path towards depression. Is there something you would recommend to help with the stress? And I say it loops back in because it could be a whole lifestyle change, right? It's not maybe just the cannabis, but is there something that you would recommend if someone was saying, I'm feeling really stressed out lately? Of course, we're experiencing that a lot post-pandemic or while we're still in this kind of pandemic phase that people are experiencing increased stress, bringing work home, working all day, all night sometimes. What would you say?
I would start with walking. Walking is one of the best things you can do for your endocannabinoid system. And so, your endocannabinoid system is basically trying to balance physiology locally throughout your body. And exercise is a spectacular way to tone your endocannabinoid response, as is yoga, all right? As is breath work. It's really interesting how all of these things, aerobic exercise, yoga, breath work, all have a tendency to increase endocannabinoid tone, which makes you more resilient, which makes you mentally healthier. And so, hike, swim, play pickleball. Oh, don't. Never mind that one. But get some exercise and play pickleball if you enjoy it.
Sure, why not? Well, thank you for also pointing out to the endocannabinoid system how it can benefit from things other than cannabinoid therapy. I think that's something that that gets lost in the messaging, that there's other things walking can benefit our endocannabinoid system. And just it goes to show how important this is in our bodies, and how what the things that we can do to make it,
Right, I mean,
improve it.
as I showed a few years ago, the runner's high is
Mhm.
not an endogenous opioid response, it's an endocannabinoid response. And so the thing is that there's an enormous amount of, you can leverage your own endocannabinoids for your mental health by simply exercising, by getting out of your chair and walking. And it's good, and you don't, it's easy to get hooked on it. And so all you have to do is say, I'm not going to drive to the store to get whatever. I'm going to just walk. And it's good for you, and you'll feel better, and it'll lift your mood. And everything everybody tells you about it is actually true, and you should do it.
Well, I'm inspired. I'm going to take a walk after this. So we're getting towards the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. And this one question came in that corrected my previous question about the clinical trial. And I think it's a good way to wrap it up, because they were asking they're actually wondering if you're using clinical trials to create the perfect products, or what goes into that, the production. So how are you developing those products based on what?
So I will use any reference at my disposal to get ideas for blends. I'm really fascinated by relatively complex blends, which are really hard to study because it's a polypharmacy question. And the truth is that understanding what's going on when you're doing polypharmacy formulation is fiendishly difficult and actually incredibly expensive to understand. So I have a tendency to go for the low-hanging fruit. I have a tendency to look for, limonene cultivars for mood elevation. I've had access to cannabis cultivars that basically only produce THC and limonene. And the interesting thing about them is those are a real happy pill for most people. They really do lift mood. Linalool cultivars do have things highly relaxing. Preclinical evidence is clear as glass that linalool definitely will relax most people, will lower blood pressure temporarily, will get you to chill out. Caryophyllene does seem to be stimulating, so I'm doing formulations for people who are going to be working or focusing. I do have a tendency to go for caryophyllene and myrcene. Myrcene used to be, everybody goes, oh, that's responsible for the indica effect, which is just completely wrong. I mean, the most famous group of myrcene dominant cannabis cultivars were the hazes. And hazes are like super wiry, like the classic sativa effect. And so our understanding of how terps modify the effects of THC have been wrong for quite a while. And hopefully we're going to get closer. Like Hopkins was working on this study with Ryan Vandry and Ethan Russo about mixing pure THC and one terpene, pure THC and a different terpene. They haven't published the studies yet, and so I want to find out. I heard the limonene one was really encouraging, and they've been on radio silence about the other results. They're probably going to find that some of these terpenes are what I call window pane terpenes. They don't do much at all. They're responsible for flavor and fragrance, but pharmacologically, they're not particularly active in the dose we're taking. Mm-hmm. And so what you're feeling in that case is the cannabinoid.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I hadn't heard about that Hopkins study, so I'll be intrigued to look into that too whenever it comes out. And you're right, it's just constantly evolving. Every day new research comes out, and And that's why also, to bring it back to the beginning of our discussion as well, it's so important to just understand that this is not a one size fits all approach. It's very one-on-one, just like you mentioned too, the practitioners who wrote in, take it one patient at a time. And then for the consumers who wrote in questions, talk to your doctor and find out what works for you. I think that's all very important.
Right, and it's there, that raises another issue. You know, when if you're a member of an HMO and the doctor's got 10 minutes to see you and he's got another patient waiting, you've got 4 more. Getting that kind of personalized medicine, it's challenging. And so you're going to have to kind of take responsibility. And taking responsibility means controlling your dose and taking notes and paying attention to where your headspace was when you started, where your headspace was 15 minutes after you took the medicine, 30 minutes, an hour, and start to understand how your own body reacts, how interactions happen in your body. And you'll start to get better outcomes. But the most important thing I can tell you is control your dose. Don't rip cannabis into your lungs and create chemical byproducts that you don't want to expose yourself to and don't have to. And you'll have better outcomes.
Absolutely. Yes, and there are, someone did write in, there's cannabis educators at all clinical levels, which is also true. You know, just, use your resources, search around. But I just want to thank you so much. This is really great conversation as always with you. I want to thank our attendees for writing in questions and being very engaged and asking such really rich questions. And if you have any more, please follow up with us. And, we'll have more fodder for the next discussion that we can have with Michael, another Q&A. So thanks again so much for your time, for your expertise, and just sharing this knowledge with us.
No worries.
Yeah.
Happy to do it. Look forward to doing it again. And next time do it for 2 hours. Really don't mind.
Yeah, right. We'll just keep on going on. All right. Well, thanks so much. And everyone, I will get this downloaded and uploaded to our website later this evening. So thank you.
Right.